Parental alienation is one of the most insidious forms of child abuse, which occurs most frequently as part of family separation and divorce. It psychologically tortures both the child and the parent being alienated. In her best selling book, Dismantling Family Court Corruption: Why Taking the Kids Was Not Enough, Maryann Petrie shares her own experiences with parental alienation and teaches what it is, including both the signs and symptoms of this sinister abuse, which is frequently empowered by the family court system. When exploitation is psychological and there are no visible bruises or scars, the only way to stop such abuse is to know what it is and recognize when it's happening. So, Maryann, thank you for coming back on Triumph Talks. Could you begin by just giving us a little better idea of just what exactly parental alienation is referring to?
Well, thank you for having me back on, Melanie. Parental alienation, unfortunately, is when one parent will turn the child against the other loving, fit parent and teaches the child to fear and hate that parent using shared persecutory
Wow,
delusions.
there's some alphabet soup words. Can you explain that?
Uh, well, they'll come up with a false narrative to tell the child. They'll take a child's memory from, we'll say, Christmas, and then they'll turn it into, well, remember when mom or dad bought you that horrible gift and then they yelled at you? Don't you remember
Oh,
that? That's how they install this shared persecutory
okay.
delusion. And it's complete emotional child abuse. And the American Psychological Association came out in 2014 and said childhood psychological abuse as harmful as sexual or physical abuse because there are no bruises, as you
Mhm.
said, there's no, cuts, but it does so
Well, their
much
minds are
damage
being
that it will actually
so
cause,
manipulated, like you said,
right.
when they're
It,
changing their
yeah,
perspective on
it
everything in
causes
life towards.
and it causes another personality
Mhm.
disorder.
Yeah, that is destructive for their whole lives, and not only for their lives, but anyone else who
Mhm.
might be in their life in the future. Yeah.
Right.
And that is very scary. I'd like to just read a little bit. I like to read from authors'
Okay.
books just to give the viewers a little taste of the quality of the book that you've written. So I just want to share a little bit that you wrote on parental alienation.
Okay.
Um, that says it's the deliberate manipulation of your own child to make them not only hate but often fear the other parent is absolutely abhorrent. Children live with the effects of alienation for the rest of their lives, and it damages their chances of reaching their full potential. If a child is being physically or sexually abused, would people turn a blind eye and ignore it? Well, parental alienation is just as damaging as physical or sexual abuse. You can't see the bruises or scars, but they are there on the inside. Don't look the other way. Speak out. Many of the general public do not know about parental alienation, and this needs to change. And I think that's so important about your book. I love this picture of you, by the way. You're just such a badass.
Thanks.
That's what's so important about what you're doing with this book is to raise awareness of what is happening. And I do think that we're more apt to jump in and do something if we figure out that someone is being physically abused or sexually abused. And yet, parental
Mhm, mhm,
alienation kind of goes under the radar in a lot of cases, and
mhm.
or what's worse is we get pulled into the delusions as if what the alienating parent is telling us is the truth. So how do we
Mhm.
help people to um, stop and pay attention and prevent this kind of abuse?
Mhm. They have to look at 2 sides of the coin. If there is a parent saying, "Oh, he's horrible. He's done this and that to the kids, and, hey, let's go out for lunch on Saturday."
Mhm.
Okay, these are your flying monkeys. So there's 2
Flying
sides to the
monkeys,
coin.
back up, what is
I
that?
would s Right.
Yeah.
Okay, flying monkeys is how the alienator recruits other individuals into their false
Mm.
narrative and into their own shared persecutory delusion so they can again inflict more pain onto the target Non-custodial parent.
Non-custodial parent, meaning that in a lot of cases with the parental alienation, at least what happened with you, is they're so successful, they get the courts to actually take the children away from a parent that's perfectly fit, capable, loving, and the only reason is because of the
Mhm.
false narratives that they've been taught or told. And then you become a
Mhm.
parent that has been alienated from your children.
Mhm.
So if
Right.
somebody were
And
to become a flying monkey, which would mean that they're just bought into it, they don't necessarily know that that's what's happening to them, right? You've got to be able to be aware of what's really going on. Um, and it
Mhm.
seems to me that if you know the signs and the symptoms of a child who's being alienated or a parent, then you might be more apt to recognize what's going on. So, can you share what are some of the signs of a child who's being alienated? Will they? Well, I would assume when your mind is being messed up like that, that your behavior starts to change, right?
right. It's so insidious, I didn't see it
Hmm.
coming. Like, for instance, my oldest would put me down and say things like, "Why are you using soap? You should be using other creams on your face than that." Little put
Hmm.
downs. And you think, well, gee, as an 11-year-old, you're thinking, well, they're trying to be independent. You make excuses for this because you don't understand that that was a phrase of degradation on you, the parent. And this is what they get these kids
So,
to do,
so an
is put down that
alienated
parent.
child or that's being targeted in this way will start to become very negative towards the other parent. And so
Mhm.
that's a sign to look for if they're so what are some other signs along and
Right.
if you see that that could just be a teenager, and teenage angst. So what are some other signs that would kind of
Mhm.
help somebody who's looking at the situation to go, okay, that actually is abuse and not just a grumpy teenager.
Right. This parental alienation can happen so fast. It can actually happen over a
Really?
weekend. You can have a loving child on Friday, and on Monday, you can have a child that will not even
Wow.
speak to you. That's how deadly parental alienation is. And there are parents and children themselves committing suicide over this as well. And, these kids have, you know, little or no regret and no empathy towards the fit, loving parent. Then they start aligning with the alienator because they
Mhm.
know when they have to go back to live with the
Mhm.
alienator, they've got to be able to perform and say the right
Yeah.
things.
So in your book, you've actually bullet pointed some of the things that people can look for that are the signs. It comes from Barbara Fiddler, just kind of citing some of the signs that she's an expert has
Oh,
said we can look for rejection and denigration of a parent for reasons that are trivial, which is you just
right.
described, rigid refusal to consider alternative views or explanations, repetition of the favored
Right.
parent's words. That now that to me would be a
Definitely.
big sign when you start to see a child say things that might not normally come out of their mouths, you know that they're being
Mhm.
programmed. So I think that's a good one.
Mhm.
Rehearsed or something that might sound like a rehearsed script. And then relatives are included in the rejection, even pets. So when you start to
Yes.
see, I think it's something we all need to watch for. When you see a person and suddenly everybody's bad talking that person, and everybody wants to
Mhm.
separate from them. Just word to
Mhm.
all of you out there watching this, and you see that happening to somebody, you don't automatically assume that they're the bad person that everybody is telling you. It might be
Mhm.
a sign that there's a whole lot of people who are being pulled into the narrative of the person that's perpetrating this abuse. And then, like you
Right.
said, little to no regret or guilt regarding the behavior towards the parent being rejected, which that has got to be
Mhm.
the most painful thing. And you went through this. Could you talk a little bit about your experience going through this kind of?
Well well, it just happened so fast. When I didn't know what this was, no one as a parent wakes up and starts saying, "Okay, I just had a baby. I'm gonna study up on what parental
Right.
alienation is." No one knows until you walk into the courtroom
Mhm.
or your ex remarries
Or
and they
your
don't
child
like
just
you.
starts rejecting you and treating and abusing you. It feels like abuse, I'm sure. Although it's them being
Right.
abused,
Oh, it
but
is.
yeah,
Right. And bear in mind, they do have a guilt about treating you badly. They won't
no.
show it. And because they have to align with that alienated parent they're
Yeah.
forced to live
And
with.
I think it's really important to point out they are forced, because a lot of times the parent who's conducting this
Mhm.
is going to threaten them, or they will
Mhm.
give them things that they want and then threaten to take them away. Some form of coercion will happen to where the child is having to behave this way until the brainwashing starts to become more complete, which is when the child starts having false memories, when they're told, oh, your mom did this and that and was like this and was like that, and none of that happened, but they eventually will believe it. And that is
Mhm.
very, very dangerous.
And it's Stockholm syndrome is
Yeah,
what it
that's a good
is.
point. Yeah, the Stockholm syndrome, where you just align with your abuser essentially. Yeah.
And that's why another reason why I wrote the book. I'm glad I wrote it because my one of my older adult children read it and he said that he was starting to remember things.
Mm.
And that was the thing that you need to do is, write a book and tell
Mhm.
your side of the story. They wouldn't
And it
listen
was
to
a chance
mine.
for him to kinda have the truth told to him where he might not have sat down with you and let you tell him, but there it is. And then he can
Mhm.
go, "Oh, that's right, I do remember that." Yeah. This episode of Triumph Talks is brought to you by SafeHavenServices.co, a private and discreet way to safely digitally store emergency money and documents in order to escape toxic relationships. Well, I
Mhm.
think it's really important
Yeah.
to bring up the fact that the term parental alienation is controversial. Not only is it a
Mhm.
terrible thing to go through, but even being able to call it that has become controversial. And I know this is something that you and I
Mhm.
have. We both are on the same side of this controversy. If people are wondering what
Mhm.
the controversy is, it's my understanding is that there's those who say, well, you can't use that phrase. If you use that phrase in court, you will be treated like you're crazy. So you might lose your case. Don't use that phrase. And so there's a lot of people who are kind of stumping for the
Mhm.
elimination of calling it parental alienation. Um,
Mhm.
and where explain how you feel about that controversy.
Well, what I'm hearing is, um, a parent will call out domestic violence, then the other opposing party will say they're alienating the kids. Now, what happened to me in my case was as soon as we got into the courtroom, the opposing attorney just blurted out that I was mentally ill and I'm alienating the kids from the father. So what it is they are abusing the term parental alienation because there are people with bruised egos that need to be soothed, and they're using parental alienation as a crutch. When yes, it does exist. It's not pseudoscience because I'm
Yeah.
living it. And there's a lot of other parents, 22 million in America, are dealing with parental
Yeah.
alienation. And to call it a different term is just not
Well,
going
what are the
to
replacement terms?
work.
Do you know what is okay to say? And so you're telling me that the problem is that some people
Mm,
are sort of using they're taking the term away from those who are going through it and claiming to have this happening to them. And so then that it seems crazy to me, because it's just like saying, well, you can't say that you were raped because somebody who wasn't raped said it, so you can't say rape. You know what I mean? That
right, right.
and I from what I'm witnessing too is that the court is trying to make that term be a phrase that if someone says, it's almost like, labeling you, like, oh, well, you don't know what you're talking about because you just used that term. um and the problem I see, like, I've published a number of books on this topic. Actually, I published one called For the Love of
Mhm,
Eric, And in this case, he was
Mhm.
alienated. He was accused of um, raping or sexually abusing his son. He lost his job, all of these things. And finally, he got the court and the jury to see what the mother was doing. Well, she went home. He gained custody. Finally, she went home and killed their son and then herself. His book is all
Mhm.
about parental alienation, and I feel very strongly that that is an important term, because I haven't heard a term that is anywhere close to as descriptive of what's happening to people as that.
Mhm.
So to me, to take that term and say you can't use it, and if you do, you're going to look crazy, is to weaponize it in a way. And as long as we are going along with that, I mean, we are talking about parental alienation on this show, and I'm not going to try to use
Mhm.
a sort of watered down term, because I don't want people to go,
Mhm.
well, oh, they said they used that term on her show. You know what I mean? I think
Right.
that the more that we all stand up and say, this is what's happening, this is what the
Mhm.
description is, and legitimize the term instead of going. I see so many people who are dealing with parental alienation and going through family court battling each other over this term, when
Mhm.
in my opinion we should come
Mhm.
together on it and battle the courts. Does that make sense? I mean, is that what you're witnessing?
Definitely.
Would you talk about that a little
Definitely.
bit?
In
What are
fact,
some of the things you're witnessing as people are?
well, some people wanna call it post-separation abuse, but people don't know what that is. If you say, "I'm going through post-separation abuse," what is
It
that?
doesn't sound as severe
That
either.
could mean a number
Abuse,
of
that's
things.
such a generic.
No.
Post separation means, okay, we're separating,
Right.
we're divorcing. Abuse, it could be anything, and it does.
Could
Alienation is
yeah.
so descriptive, and it's so painful to be
Right.
removed from the lives of your children. I just can't imagine another term that can convey as well. It's like your child is dead while while alive, because you can't access them anymore. I mean, what other term?
Right. And you can't yeah, people wanna call it parental deprivation. Well, that could mean a
Yeah,
number of things. That's just not going to
deprived.
cut it. Parental alienation, unfortunately, is the term. Okay, so there's cancer, you've got cancer. You've got parental
Yeah,
alienation. That's what it
yeah,
is. And the courts are weaponizing it to I'm sorry, but I think it's used in cases of collusion and
yeah.
payoffs.
Yeah, and sadly, as long as we look at that and say, "Oh, that's a term that if you throw that term out there, well, you're the one that's not fighting fair. You're the one that's not being truthful." And
Mhm, mhm.
it amazes me, but I think it just kind of falls into the whole corruption that we see, that we can take such a
Oh,
very clear cut descriptive phrase and and make somebody look crazy for using it. I mean, that just, if anything, it's just a perfect example of the actual process of abusing with parental alienation, to even remove you from the vocabulary that you need to be able to
mhm.
use when that's happening to you.
And it's child psychological abuse. It's in the DSM-5,
As parental alienation?
B995.51.
Okay,
Hopefully soon.
that
So
phrase
that's
is
not
not
in
there
there
yet.
yet.
But hey, it's not like we all have to follow the rules and say, well, it's not a real term until it's in the DSM, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Right. It'll be a real term when it happens to
exactly.
you.
Oh, that is a good point. That is such a good point. When it happens to you,
Mm.
and when you're ready to fight it,
Mm,
um, because that being alienated
yeah.
is, this is pretty. It's pretty cut and dry. It's
It's
not like, "Oh, I'm being deprived of
right.
some time," or "I'm being deprived of a little bit of this or that." It's just full on being cut off.
It's
Yeah,
sickening. It's sick, and these people that are perpetrating this, they're sick in the
yeah,
head. They are personality disorders, and they're ruining your children's lives, their futures, and as Dr. Mark Roseman said, this will affect 6 generations
because
to
of how
come.
long it carries down. And I know you did write in your book how important
Mhm.
it is for counselors to be able to identify when a child is going through parental
Mhm.
alienation, which I think that is part of the solution. first of all, we got to be able to call it what it is. What are we looking for? And then being able to attach the signs and symptoms. And clearly there's some experts that are calling it that because you've cited them in your book.
Mhm.
But we need counselors to be able to look and recognize when that's happening. When you start to see a collection of those signs, and then you know what you're dealing with. And that could actually work in the favor of the parent being alienated when clearly the child is exhibiting all of these different symptoms. And
Right, but sometimes the psychologist can be the problem
mhm,
because they don't recognize the parental alienation
mhm.
when they're calling for family counseling, but the mother or the father isn't coming to the sessions. They don't make a phone call and say,
Yeah.
"Hey,
And
Mary,
they
where
don't
are you?"
realize
Or, "Hey,
they might think, "Oh,
John."
well, what a
Uh,
deadbeat dad." Well, no, the deadbeat dad just wasn't being allowed to come or wasn't told where it was or all of the
right, was
activities.
never informed
Yeah.
of it.
You have the takeaway part of your book here too. You've listed from Dr. Childress more of what the parental alienation symptoms are. And it goes into a lot of detail. It's very, very good. And we won't read it right now, except to say that it's clearly
Yeah.
been defined. And so it's not like it's
Mhm,
not out there for counselors to, um, I mean, let me rephrase that. It's out there. Counselors can learn it. They can look for it. And so part of what we're trying to do with this show, with this book, and with your podcast and YouTube channel, Slam the
mhm,
Gavel, is just to be able to continue to push for this type of awareness and education so that it really doesn't have to continue. When you see a child
mm-mm,
that's suffering in these ways and you get enough of those symptoms, you can address it, but only if we're all willing to admit that it's happening and
mm,
do something about it. So if
mhm.
you are watching this show and you're dealing with parental alienation, we would really love to have you share what you've learned or what you're going through in the comments. Because a lot of times we can help each other so much just by sharing. It doesn't take a psychologist and an expert to speak on parental alienation. You can speak on it when you're going through it, just like Maryann is. So if you have any
Mm.
comments or how do you feel about the term parental alienation? Do you want to defend why we shouldn't use it? Please leave that in the comments. We would love to see your side of it as well. Um, and really, some of the greatest help that we can have when going through adversity is to read the stories of others. So just help us make this an effective platform for everyone by sharing what you have to say on the topic. And with that, please like this show if you got something good from it and subscribe to this channel so you can continue to watch as we delve more into Maryann Petrie's book. Thank you for coming, Maryann.
Thank you so much for having me on. I totally appreciate it, Melanie.